Welcome everybody to Studio 721 by Unchained Music. Studio 721 is the place where we go deep into the creative process, artist to artist. I'm your host Ryan and I'm here today with Regal Jason. Regal Jason is a British-Jamaican singer-songwriter who fuses magnetic pop melodies with powerful lyrics and alternative electronic soundscapes, creating original, sophisticated and impactful songs. He's just released his debut EP, Megafauna, which we'll be exploring today. Jason, welcome to Studio 721.
Thank you guys. Really excited.
So I thought we could explore a few tracks from Megafauna, but before we do, there's a powerful and evocative quote in your press kit that I'd like to unpack with you. We went over it on a Twitter Spaces a wee while back, but let's jump into it again anyway. So you write about your artist name, Regal Jason. I believe we are all born with royal blood, but if we do not fight for our thrones, they will be taken from us. There are many who will dare to threaten our reign. I have chosen to wage war. So what do you mean by this quote? Would you like to unpack it for us?
Yeah, so essentially Regal Jason I created as just kind of like a more nobler, bolder version of myself, because ultimately I realized that in life, most of what holds us back is just our own expectations of ourselves or our own preconceived notions of what we are able to achieve, whether that's from conditioning or from the culture around us, from what we're told growing up, from different mentors or whatnot. And so it's kind of like this internal battle, but then once you realize your full potential, you have to then actually compete against those who might want to stop you from achieving what you now believe you can. And so it's just this idea of you really are the one that decides how far you can go in life. It's all about mindset. And so Regal Jason is just to remind me to constantly be in that mindset. It's just the adjective of which Jason I want to be, and hopefully an adjective that other people can use to represent the versions of themselves that they want to be as well.
And how's that bled over into the real world for you?
Definitely, since I started labeling myself as Regal Jason or using it for my branding, I've just been a lot more expressive and bolder, even when it comes to fashion, when it comes to performance, when it comes to just choices, being comfortable in saying no to things if I really don't feel like it aligns with that version of myself. So yeah, it's just it turns into just a lifestyle, honestly. And the goal of any sort of like affirmation or thing like that is that it becomes just an innate part of you, and you have to think about it less and less. It just becomes a part of who you are. So ultimately, the goal is to be able to not even have to continue to think, oh, does this match the Regal Jason brand? But just to think, oh, does this align with me at all? You know?
Mm. And have you come across anyone that would threaten your reign or anyone that wants to bring you down in that state?
Definitely, it's not quite a literal as it is said in the way that I phrased it, but definitely I've come across many people that don't think I have the potential to do what I want to do, or people that want to change my brand completely to help me reach what their idea of success is for me, and things like that. So it's these kind of people where it's not always going to be a malicious force in your life. It could literally be someone that cares about you deeply, but just has lower expectations for you and might want to steer your course somewhere else that they think is more achievable. And it might not always be out of malicious intent. It could also be someone that thinks that they just know what is best for you, or has not seen someone like you achieve what you want to achieve. And so their own self-doubt they might project onto you. So it's not always as literal as like a foe in battle.
Yeah. It's like a foe in the mimetic battle, right? The battle of belief.
Yep.
So how do you deal with that? I mean, I've had that happen to myself as well. And for me, it's honestly always just been fire for me to be like, well, I can do this and I'm going to do this. And it just makes me even more energized. But some people get brought down. I mean, how does it work for you if you come across any kind of resistance, even if it's loving resistance from someone that has a different idea about how they think you should be?
So initially, it definitely was tough because it took me a long time to decide to even want to do music. And I was always kind of told from a young age, like, oh, you should pursue music, whatnot. But then once I actually started pursuing it is when I started coming across people that were like, I don't think you're cut out for this, whatnot. And I really did take it to heart at first, but then I started actually just studying the journeys of other artists who I admired or people that reached a level of success that I respected. And I realized that one, nothing happens instantly. You know, in the industry, they say it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. So in a couple years of your journey, you really can't be deciding whether you have what it takes to make it or not. And also, I realized that so many people found what made their careers way later on in life, just in general. And so there was this idea, once I started believing in myself, of, okay, well, now that I believe in myself, we're going to make it and everything's going to start happening. The ball is going to start rolling. And when I would face these challenges, they would be really discouraging because I couldn't see far enough into the future to realize these were just small bumps along the way. And so now I just have this idea where I know that I'm on the right course and I trust my intuition, and it becomes really obvious to me when I'm not. And so it's really about learning to trust yourself and your own intuition to continue on that course, regardless of what your immediate surroundings are. And also for me, for my genre of music, which happens to be quite alternative, I had to also start realizing that my immediate circle was not even my target audience. So I had to learn to consider the source of people telling me what was going to work and what wasn't. I had to learn to think, well, do I really value this opinion on this subject from this particular person or this particular voice? And so that's something that now I keep in mind that really helps me steer clear of distractions or people trying to dissuade me.
Yeah, it's tricky to find those honest voices that are going to tell you if something's good or not and be honest about it, but also that know what they're talking about, right?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. And I heard a wee while back, you know, along with that kind of thing about, yeah, it takes 10 years to be an overnight success, there's also this idea that it takes a period of experimentation and then kind of synthesis. It's like this thesis of like trying all sorts of different stuff, and then you create this synthesis and you hone in on something a bit more specific. And a lot of artists that have done well have experimented, and then they hone in on something a bit more specific, and then they focus on that, and then they nail that, and then they, you know, that might culturally become a little less relevant, and then they experiment again, and then they hone in again. It seems like you've kind of honed in already, but you haven't released heaps of music. I'm wondering how you went about that process.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that. I still consider myself in the experimentation phase,
Okay.
but definitely for this body of work, I did want to make sure that it was all very cohesive just as a project. So on this project, Megafauna, Empire was kind of the one that, as I performed it, everyone was like, okay, this is your song. This is the move. You should do more songs like Empire. But on the project, it is really the only song of that tempo that has that kind of radio play-esque quality in terms of the chord progressions and stuff. Everything else is a little bit more experimental. So I kind of decided, okay, I have this one song that people that enjoy pop music are still enjoying. So let me make the rest of the project as weird and experimental as I can be, since I already at least have one that kind of appeases the pop crowd a little bit more. And yeah, I'm kind of now on this fence of whether I'm going to now continue to release more of those really experimental songs, or if I'm going to kind of hone in on more the Empire sound, which is like the highest streaming song of the project so far. So we'll see in the next coming months how I go about things, because I'm still new enough that I don't really have to focus so much on streams or, you know, followers or gains or whatever, because I'm still new enough that I don't have that kind of pressure. And I know that later on, as I go and I start doing deals and whatnot, I'm gonna actually have to look really carefully at the data and make sure that I'm actually getting, you know, returns. And so currently I still consider myself to be in that experimental phase, because I know that as I go along, it's gonna be more important to actually appease the fan base that's already grown around what I've released. So yeah.
Yeah, you get kind of sucked into a stream of some sort, right? But that stream feeds you in all sorts of different ways.
Definitely.
And that's a choice whether you want to be floating along that stream, or if you want to jump into a different stream, or reject both, right? Yeah.
And as a fan, I've definitely had artists where I feel like they've kind of just forgotten about me because the sound changes so drastically, you know.
Yeah.
But I definitely am appreciative of artists that are willing to experiment and willing to evolve, because it just makes the journey that much more interesting. But it definitely always is a risk, because, you know, not everything is going to appeal to the same person. So you have to kind of decide, okay, am I going to go for what I need to do as an artist for my personal evolution, or am I going to appease the fans that supported the last few projects and just keep them, strung along? So currently I don't have that pressure, and it's great.
It's like the the AC/DC route versus the David Bowie route or something.
Yeah.
I think they asked Angus Young from AC/DC, like, what's it like to record the same 13 albums? And then he replied, oh, I thought it was 14. So they're self-aware that do the same formula for like 40 years and still sell out stadiums, or you go completely off the rails. And Bowie released so many different types of music, and I went back through his back catalogue a wee while back because he's a very inspirational figure. But an interesting thing learning about a lot of these great art, like people that are considered great, is that they released a lot of kind of crappy stuff, on the albums and stuff. They tried all sorts of different things. They released heaps of stuff, and they produced heaps of stuff, and they remembered for the tracks that really culturally hit and did really well. But they, people like him were experimenting throughout their entire career and trying all sorts of different stuff, and that's usually inspiring to me. I think that's more inspiring than the AC/DC wrote. There's no although there's no like right or wrong way. Some people will make one genre and smash it and do it their whole career and love it, and all power to them, but I think the experimental route, if you can do it, if you can produce enough and you can produce enough at high quality, it can be a really rewarding experience. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with it. Let's jump into a few tracks. Yeah, all good. Let's jump into a few tracks off of your EP Megafauna. So you mentioned Empire before, which is the lead single, and expresses the many dimensions, good and bad, of a city. That's what I've taken from the lyrics, at least. Let's have a listen to that, and then I'll ask you a few questions.
Every side where the lights creep the sky, you can't miss it, dancing in the distance. I get down where the towers greet the clouds, and below me 1,000 feet of stories, opulence and violence, consequence and sirens, kingdom where the meek pay their tribute to the tyrants, jewel of innovation, built from desolation, harboring both the pride and the shame of the nation, living in the old city, young city, bold city, gold city, grind, city rich, city poor, city raw, city rise, city girl, city boy, city ploy, city light, city soul, city sign, city skyline, city mind, city art, city power, city light, city love, city buzz, city love, city nice, city strong, city weak, city free, city wild, city street, city beat, city lifetime.
So what inspired this song? Was there a city in particular?
So I wrote Empire while living in downtown LA. So I was just always walking around. I was working from home, so I'd walk to my favorite coffee shop and walk home, and I'd walk probably 40, 50 minutes a day. And you would literally see like the heights of innovation, and then just like the most degradation you could see ever in a city. Like the living conditions would just vary so drastically, from tents on the side of the road to people sleeping on benches to some of like the most expensive luxury high rises in LA. You'd see amazing museums and amazing feats of architecture right next to just piles of garbage and human waste. And so Empire kind of highlights on how most major cities showcase what a country or society is the most proud of and the most ashamed of, all right there in this like microcosm. And so in LA, it was definitely very highlighted for me, and that was kind of the inspiration. So I started writing it just as I was walking around through the city. One night, was hanging out with my producer Nelson, and was just like, hey, I have this idea for a song. I think the bass line goes like this. I think the drums go like this. And as we worked on it, I just wrote the rest of it like very shortly. I think it took us maybe an hour to have most of the structure of the beat together. So yeah.
Yeah, America's a pretty, strong example of, they call it in economics the Gini coefficient, and it's basically the gap between the rich and the poor, and how much of the wealth is held by a small percentage of the population. And it's really, really high in America. It means that there's a very small percentage of the people in the country own most of the wealth, and countries that are more equitable. It's lower, and so there's the wealth is more distributed across the population. But yeah, America's a really interesting example of that, and I'm yet to visit, but I've heard many examples of that when people go into these, especially in California at the moment, where there's
Yeah, California is definitely like you see so much of it. And it's also kind of ironic because, like, policy wise, like, the idea of California is that they are more caring or more, open to helping out people in need or to creating programs to lift up people out of poverty. Like, that's kind of how they're sold as a state. But then you just see this so intensely there. Same thing in a place like New York, where you just see the homelessness crisis hit so hard. And yeah, it was a lot. It was definitely a lot and very jarring. Yeah.
And so was that, I mean, you've mentioned, you're in Panama right now, and you spend a lot of time all around the world. Was that kind of a new experience for you being in LA, or were you just looking at it through a new lens as an artist, or, why was it so impactful in that particular point?
So definitely, so originally I'm from Kingston, Jamaica, and then I moved to Panama City, Panama, and then Orlando, and then LA. And I think every city that I've lived in has definitely had that on display, especially like Panama, because Panama, a lot of their economy benefits from foreign investments, which directly benefits the richest people in the country, and then like ever so slowly trickles down, or like kind of doesn't sometimes. And so definitely experienced that in Panama, but I think in LA, what it was walking through the city on a daily basis. It just hit me much harder versus in Panama, like driving from place to place. You kind of like don't go through those bad areas, or you're not face to face with homelessness or things like that. They're kind of, put into their little nooks and crannies of the city, so you don't really recognize it as much. But walking just through the heart of downtown LA every day, there was no hiding from it, just the stark contrast. And so I think that's why it hit me more. But as I studied the concept more to write the song is when I realized that this existed in every city that I had lived in, and in almost every major city. It's just the way that you experience the city can change that. So yeah, and LA definitely, I think, especially downtown, does not as good of a job of hiding that. It's just out in the open. There's no hiding it. So yeah.
Yeah, cities are intense places. Very different, very different to the forest or the beach. Let's jump into Bullets, which is next up on the EP, and you've expressed this one's about gun violence. Could you share how this particular track came to be?
So Bullets, I moved to Orlando for college like months after the huge Pulse shooting, which was a historic shooting in US history. And since I was moving to the city where it happened, I had friends that I met who knew people that died in the shooting. And it was such a popular club. It's a place that I likely would have been at if I had already been living there, because people would frequent this club. And so that was the first time in my life I'd ever been near to a shooting. And then during my US experience, there were just so many others that happened around me, like some even like 30, 15 minutes away, that weren't even big enough to make national news. And that's when I kind of realized, like, wow, like the society is so desensitized to this, because if this had happened in Panama, even like a small scale one, or if this had happened in London, for example, it would be national news regardless of if it was only like 3 or 4 people, So it was something that was just very strange to me, how normal it was, like getting like alerts of like, oh, active shooter over here, or oh, 15 minutes from my university, some guy got fired, so he just shot up a parking lot. And it wasn't like, so we're gonna have like arrest from school or whatever. It was like, yeah, but life just goes on. Like it, I realized that it was just like a normal happening. No big deal was made about it. And so my writing this song was kind of like me making a big deal about it, because to me it really was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was weird because Panama definitely is like a third world country. They do have high crime, same with Jamaica, but it was always just knowing what areas not to go to or who not to hang out with. But this was the first instance in my life where these shootings were happening in places where I could have easily been, because they were so random and just targeting random civilians. And so it was a situation where I felt like I was actually at risk. And it was weird to think about, because even though the crime rate might be higher in like Kingston, Jamaica, I just knew where to go, versus in Florida with the Pulse shooting, I was like, I likely would have been there. You know, it was this idea of like, I'm not safe anywhere. So I wrote Bullets, not necessarily to impart my opinion on how gun violence should be handled, but just more to raise awareness for the subject, because I think it's going to take a lot more conversation for people to find these solutions that they're going to agree on, especially in the US where, you know, the Second Amendment and whatnot, it's such a part of the American identity and it's such a like polarizing topic that ultimately it would not be something that me as an outsider could just say like, here is the easy solution. But I definitely wanted to create something that would just cause a conversation. And also, when I was researching the topic, I realized that these mass major shootings aren't even the number one cause of like gun violence. Like in the US, there's all these suicides that are happening. There's all these accidental shootings, like during COVID, because more kids had access to guns, there were just accidental shootings and stuff happening. And when you just look into the data of shootings, especially when it pertains to the US, you just realize like a serious conversation does need to be had. And I don't think there's any one solution that's going to work across the entire country, because each state, you know, kind of operates individually on certain things. And the culture changes from state to state, which is something I realized as well as I was moving throughout the states. But I definitely just wanted to write something that would spark up a conversation about it. So, yeah.
And you've got an incredible live audio-visual performance of this tune on YouTube. So let's take a look at that. And then I'd love to hear how that live performance came about.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Lay down your weapons, your protection, their demise. Names turn to numbers, torn asunder by firefight. Scared to feel powerless, render them powerless to you. Cling to your firearms. You can't kill a broken heart with bullets. So lay down your arms. Fight to be safe, fight to be smart. All of your strength and you can't defend us from the ones who break our hearts. Forgive the ones who've done you wrong. Weapons are not what make us strong. So lay down your arms. Fight to be safe, fight from the hurt. Lay down your arms. Target on our backs, target on your heart. Fire it at the dark. People fall apart, people fall apart. Hand upon your heels, feel the silence guilt. Where our blood is spilled, streets are running red. Empathy is dead.
So tell us how this came together.
So my brother was actually working with this company that was doing this series called Thought Patterns, where they were just highlighting different artists and doing some interviews. And so they're called Chemistry Creative, and they have studios in New York. They reached out, I sent them the song, and they actually, as a team, came up with the concept. I knew that I wanted some sort of representation of the violence. And so instead of going so literal with guns and bullets and explosions, they went with artistic representations of violence through like Renaissance paintings. Not sure if that's the exact era where the paintings were taken from, but you'll see there's a woman with a dagger, you'll see arms reached out, you'll see screaming, and just representations of like the emotions that these happenings bring about. And yeah, we just have lots of flashing imagery. It's meant to feel very chaotic. Definitely should have put an epilepsy warning on it. Watching it back, I was like, this is very intense, but that's exactly the feeling that we wanted. We didn't want this to be something that was easy listening, because we wanted you to feel the intensity of the topic and the depth of emotions, whether or not you were listening to the lyrics. And I think the visuals really do that in terms of just making a listener feel somewhat uncomfortable. Because I think there are certain times where we try to change our verbiage around scenarios to make it seem like something that is more easy to discuss, when some things are just hard to discuss, and we just have to grapple with the fact that it's an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had, and we don't need to change our verbiage or change the language around it in order to try to make it more palatable, because it's not palatable.
Yeah.
And the more that we make something like that very palatable, the more we kind of become desensitized to it. So the idea was to try to keep it pretty intense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's intense, but it does have these slight moments of reprieve in it. There's one frame that says, forgive, and it kind of blacks out. And yeah, it's a powerful performance, man. Big kudos to you.
Thank you.
Your vocal performance on it is amazing.
Thank you.
So the last track of the EP I'd like to look at is Reprise, which is the closing track, which is epic. And the production on this one shifts all over the place in a really good way, and the lyrics tie together the whole EP. Let's take a short listen, and then I've got a couple of questions about this tune.
I'm not a being for you to define. Poltergeist, heart of a lion and soul of a child. Purified, land of gods and of beasts and of bones. From the slums laying siege to the thrones. We're awake and we're breaking our silence, making waves to defy. We're alive, hear us roar like we're lions. We are signs in the stars like Orion. We're ablaze, we're aflame, we are wildfires. Kings and queens taking reign in our empire.
So can you share how this track came together and how you managed to kind of sum up the EP in a single song?
So I had moved to London, and my producer Nelson was like, "I want to make a kind of British version of Empire." Hence, like the drum pattern is very like UK. And so he sent it over. And originally we were thinking maybe we'll just do like an Empire remix, but I was like, you know what? What if I just took all of the songs and kind of blended them together just to solidify the overarching message of the whole project, since it had kind of been all over the place in terms of just talking about these heavy themes. But ultimately, the project is a social commentary. And so I just wanted to have one song at the end that tied in the key points of each song to kind of just solidify in your mind, like, okay, the whole song is a social commentary. And we called it Reprise because it is the reprise of every song on the EP. It was definitely tricky to produce and get everything together because at this point I was in London, Nelson was still in LA, and my vocal guy and mix guy was in Florida. So we're just sending ideas all around, having to record the vocals during the pandemic, and trying to layer every single melody or vocal line all together and deciding like what's going to peak out here, how are we going to do the panning, all that kind of stuff was very fun. And I'll never forget working on that track and just tweaking it forever. But yeah, ultimately in the end, I think it is one of the favorites of the project. A lot of people seem to really resonate with that one. And so I love that because it kind of is a culmination of everything. So if you love that track, then to me, you liked the whole EP, whether or not you did. So yeah.
Yeah, I really liked it, man. It's yeah, and it's got this epic breakdown in the middle, and yeah, it's just super impressive how you managed to culminate all in one piece, and it feels very, very much like the end. I can imagine that live before an encore would be super powerful.
Yes, yeah, and I definitely wanted to include that little breakdown with the spoken word part, just to kind of introduce myself, because during the whole project, you might be thinking, who's this guy that's so opinionated on all these things? And like, who is he? What does he even stand for? So at the very end, I was like, okay, let me like introduce myself and what I stand for as an artist so that it's clear at the very end. So that was why we did that breakdown.
Yeah, kudos, man. And you mentioned you work with Nelson, also known as Brightmore, producer on this project. Can you tell us about the production process of the EP itself, Megafauna? Did you work, I mean, you mentioned you were in different locations. Did you work in person at all with Nelson on this? And your vocal person, is that like a studio that you go to and work with, and do they coach you through and all that sort of thing? I'm super curious how this all came together.
How this came about, Mark Ariel Berry is my mix engineer. He also produced Media, the entire song, which is primarily vocal based, which is why it was right up his alley. He was actually my mix instructor when I was studying music production in Florida. And then we collaborated on a song for one of his clients. And ever since then, we started working together, but producing very alternative tracks that I kept pushing the releases for, because I was like, I really don't know how to get this to its target audience. I really don't know how I would release this and get any sort of attention just from my immediate circle. And then when I moved to LA, met Nelson because he was moving into an apartment as I was moving out. We bonded over having moved to LA from Orlando, started listening to each other's music. And for most of the project, I would have an idea, get together with Nelson and just tell him, okay, here's the chord progression, here's the bass line, here's the drum pattern. And his knowledge of synths and his sound library was just cooler than anything I could have imagined on my own. So it was perfect to kind of just blend that together, with the exception of Bullets, where he basically had a chorus already done that I loved. And so I just had an idea that already worked with it. There were actually a few where it was kind of like that, where we might have started writing together, but then we ended up going with an idea that he already had, an idea that I already had, and we just found how to mesh them together. So it felt, a lot of the songs kind of felt like they were destined to come about forever, because I'd be listening through my recordings from years ago and be like, this sings perfectly over this verse thing that you started however long ago. And it just felt very meant to be. And yeah, so that's how it was working with him. And everything was in person besides Already One and Reprise. Already One, he sent me an idea while I was in London. I produced my part over it, wrote to it. And that was the only song that I think I actually just wrote the entire thing after we had like the sonic idea together. Everything else is kind of the other way around, where I'd have something written and we just build around it. So yeah. And working with Mark was also like that where I was in London and we had to just send ideas back and forth. And media took us forever because we really wanted to use instrumentation. And ultimately, because I was writing with vocals in the end, we're like, you know what, we're just going to have to use just vocals and drums because that's just what feels the most natural. But yeah, it was created all over. And then at the very end of the pandemic, we all reunited in Orlando to just do like a big finishing week, which turned into like a finishing month as we kept just trying out little tweaks here and there in terms of the mix and master. So yeah.
There we go. So yeah, sort of produced all over the show, but then, you know, tied together at the end. Because I was curious, like that, it sounds so cohesive as an EP, and maybe that last month managed to actually get it, you know, cohesive and tight.
Definitely helps. Definitely helps.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that you were learning mixing. Do you produce as well? Like, do you mess around on Ableton or Logic?
So my degree is in music production, but as I was studying it, I quickly just realized that I only liked producing when it was for myself. And then even after I started producing things for myself, I just kept meeting people that were way further along on their production journeys. So I think that one day I will release something completely produced by myself, but at this point, it's always collaboration. So on the EP, there are definitely moments where I might have played in the chords, I might have selected the synth. Already the verses are a lot of the sounds that I just produced in Logic, but ultimately it was always sending the idea to Mark or Nelson for them to clean up or to replace certain sounds with their more extensive library, which they had accumulated over years. And compared to them, I was like a baby on my production journey. So definitely, I think in the future, I will release something that I do all myself, but I'm just currently not confident enough. It was also kind of instilled in me at school that a lot of our instructors would say, they were like, the true like talent of producing comes from years of like seasoning and experimentation. And so it was always kind of even told, like, even though you're going to get this degree, don't necessarily think that you're like a full-fledged producer yet, which I think some of the students definitely needed to hear because the ego was like so high amongst the class. But I feel like for me, it almost kind of set me back because I was already questioning my production. And then after those talks, I was like, okay, will I ever get there? But no, it is one of my goals to finally release something completely produced by myself in the future. So yeah.
But I mean, that's a super useful thing to have, because if you didn't have any production knowledge at all, it's hard to, you at least have the language to talk to a producer and know how how things should sound, and that language is invaluable, because otherwise you're kind of going like, oh, can you make it sound bigger? Like it's not going to work.
Exactly. And that so important with the long distance was being able to communicate. And that's why it was so great to work with Mark, because he literally like taught or teaches at the university that I went to. So I knew the exact language that I was taught to use to communicate with him. So it was so easy for certain things like that, because I knew that everything that I had learned, like he literally had to teach. So it was just easy to communicate. Nelson and I would have moments where it was definitely easier for us to work in person. Especially because we're doing synth-based stuff. So it wasn't as easy as like, oh, we want a piano. It's like, oh, we want like a rounder synth for this moment that's like kind of a saw wave, but still kind of square around the edges. And just trying to imagine what this synth is going to sound like. Or I'm like, oh, I need fuzzy, but not buzzy. And this one needs to be buzzy and deep, but bright. And like just the synths were what took the most in terms of communication, which is why that was just easier to do together. We could just play through an entire library of like sounds. Because that was definitely tricky, and still to this day, I just prefer to do that kind of stuff in person where I can just hear everything. I've now collaborated with some other producers for other projects where they're always kind of shocked by how hands-on I become when it comes to those kind of things, but then they're always like at least grateful that I can communicate with them with the same knowledge of the program. So definitely glad that I went and got the degree, and even how I met these producers in the first place was definitely through that. So yeah, and there's something to be said about production teams. If you look at a lot of the really big artists today, there's a bunch of outliers that have been doing it for, like, as you say, 20 years and are well seasoned and like can produce tracks in like a few hours and they're world class. But a lot of these like really big pop guys, they have whole teams that produce stuff. And yes,
if you've got a bit of the skills that you need, but you can't quite get it over the line, or there's someone that's just simply better than you because they've been doing it longer at that particular thing, but you've got another skill that they don't have, like yourself with singing and lyric writing and the whole presentation of the artwork. You've got a really beautiful synergistic relationship at that point, and you help each other. And I don't, it's good to be able to let the ego down a little bit and be like, for years I was always like, I have to do it all to myself. I have to prove myself. I have to prove to the world that I can do everything myself. And I did that. I've done like EPs and things, but at some point, I realized there's other producers that are quicker and better, and working with them's been an absolute joy, because it's just the whole process is more simple, more fun, and better. And at the end of the day, it's about the music, right? The music's the thing.
Yes.
It's at least for me, it's less about myself these days and more about like, is the music good? And I imagine that's similar for you. You've got this character of Regal Jason that's coming out, and the music that's coming out, and the processing of this social commentary and the things that you've experienced, and you want that to be the best it can be. And if that means working with others and making it a team effort, and that's going to be better, then that's the way to go, right?
Exactly. And a lot of it too, like for me, was like my hesitation with collaboration was that I didn't want to water down my sound or make anything sound like less me. But one thing I realized as I was sharing music that I thought I had like kind of strayed from my original sound is that to the audience, there are so many things about me that are just like, you cannot erase out of anything that I've touched. You know what I mean? And so I realized that there was so much more range for me to collaborate without it changing my sound or selling out, because there was just, if I had written a song, you could tell, so just by the melody line or just by the vibrato on the voice or little details that I never even considered still left my mark on a song. And so that's one thing that I've just been learning more and more, is to be open to these collaborators, even if our styles aren't necessarily the same, because someone might be more in tune with reaching my target audience than I might even be. And I'd be surprised with how much that creation in the end still is a accurate reflection of my artistry. So definitely something I've been like learning very slowly, like letting people in to work on my projects, especially because I do write everything. Sometimes I've thought to myself, I'd probably release a lot more music if I was writing less of it, because I'd be less emotionally attached. So yeah, we'll see. But currently I haven't collaborated with any other songwriters for my own release. So that might be something in the future that I experiment with, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, your voice is very distinctive, and it's going to be pretty hard to make to make that not Regal Jason. If that's on something, people are going to hear that and go, "That's Regal Jason," I think. So, I'd love to talk a little bit about your voice. You've got an amazing vocal range, and your expression is super impressive, and technique seems impeccable. Like, do you work with any particular methodology for vocal technique?
Thanks. Not really. Both my parents were in a gospel group when they were younger. And so since I was little, they were teaching us all harmony. Like before we could talk, they would see if we could like match notes, match pitch. And I was actually the one they thought like did not inherit the gift. They were like, we don't know what happened with this one. But I was the one that wanted to sing the most. So eventually they just put me into vocal lessons, very just like classical, like breath control stuff for a few months. And I think I did like a couple recitals here and there. And then after that, it was just through watching different vocal coaches on YouTube, people like Natalie Weiss, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but just watching different vocal coaches and seeing their techniques. Definitely think I was influenced by vocalists like Lorde or Brandon Urie is someone that I liked. I definitely liked the powerhouse vocalists, and then I liked people that had darker vocals, and that was kind of, I realized, more of a mixed thing than even performance. But
darker in the timbre, you mean?
Yeah, or even just like in mic choices, like someone that would maybe use like something more like this than like a Rhodes like NT two-way or whatever, that makes you more thin. I liked more like the darker and warmer side than the bright and thin. So yeah, I kind of just through experimentation. And then with range, I think it was because when I started out singing, I sang it in like different worship bands and stuff, like in like the Christian community. And I was always put on harmony for the longest time because until you're like old enough to like sing lead or like, you know, prove yourself, you'd be put on harmony. And so I really did have to learn how to sing in my falsetto or how to sing very low because I wouldn't be the one placed on melody. So I would just have to find which harmony best suited my voice and just kind of go with it because that was the only way I was going to be heard. And so that definitely taught me how to experiment with my range.
So it's been kind of a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And also like through those bands, because it was singing live every single week, I think that also just naturally taught me a lot through watching the other singers around me in the band, because every week we had to sing live and every week the goal was to really impart this spiritual experience on the audience. And so we really had to learn how to read each other, how to read the audience, how to learn to do different things with our vocal to get more emotion, how to give that chills moment and whatnot. And so definitely singing every single week regularly in practice and in performance would help. And I always tell people like, singing is something we often think is just an innate gift, but ultimately practice makes progress for anything. And if you are doing something that regularly, you will see, you will succeed and you will see progress. Because definitely if you like look back on any of my old videos as a child, like I would not be someone you would spot out to be like, oh, he can really sing. Like it was a mess. So.
Same for me. Yeah, I can tell anyone listening that it's not an innate gift. There's like advantages. It's basically if you sing a lot as a child, people think you have an innate gift, but that's more environmental. It's more if you're, this is why more women sing more and are better singers, because it's more socially acceptable for a girl to be singing as a child than, I mean, it's changed now, but when I was growing up in the culture, it was there was a lot of homophobia and it was gay to sing. It was gay to sing and dance.
Oh yeah.
Which was just so stupid because for so many reasons. And so I didn't sing for like properly for years and years until I was about 14 or 15, and I was forced to do vocal lessons at high school if I wanted to stay in music class, and I protested I protested, and then I had this amazing vocal teacher, shout out to Helen, and because of her I'm now a singer, and that's my primary musical outlet, and I've traveled around the world with it, and super grateful. But if, again, similar to yourself, if you heard me as a child or as a teenager especially starting out hearing singing, you would have been like, damn, that kid should choose a different career. But but doggedly pursuing it, and just keep going. They say if you can talk, you can sing. If you can't talk, if you've got one of those like box things, okay, maybe you can't sing,
then maybe not. Yeah. And ultimately it's like just being in safe spaces where you're not afraid to mess up, because a lot of like any instrument, like when you start out, you're going to be bad. I think people are more afraid to be bad with singing because it seems like more of like a personal like part of them than like, I'm bad at piano versus like my actual voice is bad, But ultimately, you have to be okay to mess up, have those voice cracks, be off pitch, have people around you that are going to correct you, but in a very safe and comforting manner. Yeah. And I definitely had that with my parents. Sometimes it definitely was annoying, but I definitely had that with them. Even with my songwriting, I remember like for talent shows, my mom would like vet my lyrics to like just make sure they sounded like educated or sounded like well put together. And things like that, but it was always done in a very loving way. And so to be allowed to mess up and still be celebrated and accepted is definitely what inspired me to keep going. And I went to a very, very small school. I think my graduating class was like 23 to 25 kids, like very small. And that also definitely inspired me to keep doing music, because although on a like larger scale, I was pretty bad at music, for that small group, I was good enough that I was celebrated for it. And so it kind of like instilled in me, like, this is something I could be good at. Just from that safe space that I was in. So, yeah.
You just got to kind of get to the point where, where it's fun enough and you're good enough that you can keep getting better, right? Just getting over that line with any instrument is the hardest part. Yeah. And do you follow any vocal health rules? Is there anything that you don't eat, or is there anything you don't do, or anything you do particularly to keep your voice in shape?
So it depends. Like for me, dairy makes my sinuses drain and like I get mucus in my throat and stuff. So if I know I have a show coming up, I will not eat any dairy for like up to a week or more before. I won't drink on the night of a show until after I performed. But for me, that's more about my vocal control. Like my riffs and stuff will get sloppy as I like drink. Like it's just I need to be completely sober to focus on stuff like that. But generally in life, no. Definitely, I'm like a big tea person, but I will avoid teas with caffeine if I know I have to sing. I won't do anything with caffeine. Lots of honey, lots of just like herbal stuff. But I do not. I won't say I take the best care of my voice. I should probably be doing vocal rests a lot more. Like that was something that I realized really helped me improve. When I was in London, because of my job, I was talking all the time, and then I would go out and then perform, and I was just constantly exhausted. So one thing I had to learn was even when talking to support from the diaphragm so that I'm not just tiring out my vocal cords as I'm talking all the time. And then the second thing I had to learn was that some days I literally just had to not talk at all if I was going to have a good performance. So yeah, those are things that I've kind of kept into the routine, but I can kind of feel when I have to do it and when I'm good to go. So yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, the old diaphragm with talking's an interesting one. That's definitely something to keep in mind. It's something I'm definitely guilty of.
Yeah, because some people will like lose their voice just from doing like a weekend of talking and shouting a lot. But if you're supporting, you should be able to talk and shout all weekend and still have a voice on Monday. But if you're shouting and talking from the wrong place, it's just like singing, you're going to lose your voice. So
yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes total sense. So let's jump back into some musical stuff. Your music's very left of field. We talked about it earlier in the conversation, that it's this kind of alternative electronica genre. What drew you to that specific space in music?
So I was always interested in sounds that were new. I loved things that sounded completely fresh. And with electronic music, there's so much room to do that because, as I was talking about with synths, you are literally creating new sound palettes and soundscapes. Unlike music where you're just using guitars and pianos and whatnot, there's only so much you can do that's going to be different palette-wise. I was really drawn to Lorde when she first came out with that first project. I was like a Tumblr kid back in the day. But one, I loved that the arrangements were unlike anything else on the pop charts at the time. And two, substance-wise, she was a 17-year-old girl singing what was marketed as pop or sometimes rock, but romance was not a big theme lyrically. And that was kind of unheard of for like a young girl in that like market. And so she was kind of one of the first artists that I listened to that I thought, oh, that kind of gives me hope, because I was someone that was always writing songs about different experiences that I had in life that didn't sound like anything that was on the pop charts or on the radio, because everything was so romance focused or so like seasonal or summer bop or whatever. So definitely was drawn to Lorde and the synths and the hard hitting drums and that hip hop style percussion, which I definitely have kind of in a way adapted into my own music. It's not that you could necessarily play her album and my EP in the playlist, but I think there's certain elements that you'll hear are there. I also loved this artist, Banks, and this group, Son, SOHN, produced a lot of her first project, and they have a lot of great uses of synths. But yeah, I just reached towards artists that I think have their own sound or own genre within themselves. FK Twigs, some of her first projects as well, I was extremely drawn to. And yeah, I just loved listening to music where I felt like there was no one else that sounded like this artist. If I wanted to listen to that vibe, I had to go to them. And so with my first project, it was almost more important to me that it be unique to me as an artist than it actually be like commercially viable, if that made sense. So I was like, I just want to create something where if you really like that sound, you're going to be asking me to make more music, because you're not going to be able to get it from other people that are out there in the industry. And yeah, and I think that comes with my lyrics as well, the way that I word things or the topics that I'll choose to sing about. I was always thought this is much more valuable if it is an expression that is somewhat unique to me, because otherwise there are other people you could go to if you wanted to listen to that, you know? So yeah. Also, an appeal of electronic music was just being able to create it remotely all around the world, or create it with just a laptop rather than hire musicians and rent a studio. It's just a much more of a feat to accomplish that kind of work. I do think I will eventually dabble into more live instruments. And I already have with some of the demos I'm creating, as I have more budget to just, hire musicians and work out those arrangements and whatnot. Definitely want to do some orchestra stuff eventually, but I'm glad that I started out on this path, and I'm going to continue for a while with this kind of regal pop as it's coming to be called. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. Regal pop, I like it. Yeah, because your lyrics are they're both upfront, but they're also lofty at the same time. Like they've got these high concepts, but they're mixed with everyday experience. And I think it's quite a nice balance. Because if you get too conceptual, people don't, a lot of people kind of switch off. And if you're too upfront and too everyday, it's very much in the pop realm and kind of what a lot of people are doing.
Yeah.
But I like the mix of it. How do you go about writing and refining your lyrics? Do they come out in kind of a gestalt all at once, or do you go through and refine them meticulously? Like, how does that work?
So it kind of depends on the song. A lot of my songs are just like blips that come to me all the time. So I'm just always recording voice notes, always waking up in the middle of the night and just recording something. And sometimes I'll piece them together where I'm like, oh, this voice note from 2016 actually is the verse to this voice note to yesterday, which is the chorus. And so a lot of them kind of feel like they've just come to me, and it's almost like I rarely sit down for myself and I'm like, I'm going to write a song. Every time I do that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to pitch that to Sync, or I'm going to pitch that to another artist, because it just feels so too thought out, if that makes sense. But I'll definitely, after I put these little ideas together, I will go back, and as I'm singing it, oftentimes different words will come to me, or different iterations of the verses and whatnot. So I will listen over and over and over again before I decide on the final lyrics. But the general concepts I just get in these little blips pretty naturally. And so usually after I've had enough of these kind of musings that come to me, when I feel like I have like 70% of a song, like with these recordings, that's when I'll sit down and say, okay, let me just piece it together and string it out and finish it. So yeah, like I have this song that I'm writing currently that, to put it into perspective, I started on my first ever trip to New York, and on this last trip to New York, which is probably maybe my fifth or sixth since 2018, is when the final bridge just came to me out of nowhere, and I was like, okay, this is the song now. And I try not to rush things like that, because I could just feel, as I kept going back to the city, this is gonna come to me as I'm here. Let me not just try to rush this and throw in a bunch of generic city travel lyrics, So.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has to feel like a real lived experience. So
yeah. So it kind of just moves through you.
Yeah, and sometimes it's
pen.
quicker than others. Yeah, like Empire, just from 2 walks through downtown LA, I really had the song, and then once the beat came together. But if someone sends me a beat that I'm then gonna tweak and write a song to, it will take me much longer if I actually plan on releasing it, because I want to feel like I've sat with it and lived with it for a while. Rarely will I just sit down and write to a beat and think at the end, oh, this is for me. I'm always like, I'll just pitch this to someone else, because it just feels like not enough thought went into it. Yeah.
And what about your melodies? Do they come at the same time as the lyrics, or do you kind of come up with phonetics and then create some lyrics around that? How does the lyrics? Seems like the lyrics come first for you.
So the melodies come with the lyrics, and oftentimes the melodies will come first. So let's see, Empire, for example, I was kind of inspired by Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, with the whole chitty 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 bang bang, and I was like, oh, if I change chitty to city and I just put words in between, I thought that concept was cool. And so I was walking around downtown LA just going city, 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 and I knew that was the melody line that I wanted. And then I knew in between the little notes, city-da, 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 just connected it as a line. So I kind of had lyrics come to me in terms of city, but then I had these melody parts that I knew I needed to hit, and then I found words for those parts in between after. So it really depends, but I have other times where I have a melody line recorded, and then one day out of the blue, I'm like, these lyrics are gonna match perfectly. But I do try to focus a lot on melody, because I think that's what keeps me in the pop sphere, is that melody is very important ultimately. I think when you start to care more about the message than the melody is when you get really alternative, but I still try to care about my melodies a lot, and try to find a good balance between. So yeah.
And what's the soundtrack in your head? Do you have, like I pretty much always have a song playing in my head, usually someone else's song, like whatever I've been listening to recently is just rocking around like a radio. Do you have a soundtrack that's rock around in your head? Is there like, do these kind of melodies just like float in as you're walking around, like these original ones? What's going on in Jason's brain radio?
So I do not listen to a lot of music because I always have one of my own song ideas in my head. And so usually it's like in a month, or even in a week, I'll kind of have 4 different ones where I'm like, okay, these are the 4 that are in my head this week. And then as new things come, I'm like, okay, which song is that for? Which concept does that work with? So yeah, currently, since I just left New York, I still have that other song that I basically finished writing in my head constantly, where I kind of go through and refine it. Yeah, my parents used to always think I looked crazy because I'd just be in public, just mouthing words, just like standing in the grocery store, like staring off in the distance and just like mouthing and humming under my breath. But I'm just constantly writing, which is why like I would get so annoyed and people would just start like playing music out of the blue without asking first, or like on a road trip, or like just chilling in the house or whatever, because it would mess up my thought process so much. And I was like, I can't think, I can't write. So yeah, definitely I live in silence a lot because I'm just constantly writing.
That's so interesting. Yeah, and I guess your friends have to get used to that. Don't play, ask Jason if there's a song in his head before you play anything. Same thing happens to me. I get super pissed off if I've got something. Happens to me as well. Usually walking, it happened a lot in Europe when I was walking around cities, and you catch like a glimpse of a weird kind of echo of some kind of melody, and that would turn into a different melody in your head, and then it's like, oh, what's that? And then I'd get the voice memo out, and then a friend would interrupt you. Hey, do you want to buy this? And you're just like, leave me alone.
Yeah, yeah.
Super jarring, eh? So your friends, I suppose, have to just know that, like, okay, we have to find out, make sure Jason doesn't have a song going on in his head before we put something on.
Or sometimes what I'll do to combat it is that I'll put on like my noise canceling headphones, and I will just play the most recent voice memo of the idea like over and over, and then just like try to write to that. But even like when I'm in the studio, a lot of producers will just put a beat on loop so I can write to it. And I'm always like, no, I know the chord progression now, so pause it so I can have the silence to think, because I might be not on that part of the loop that I'm trying to write, So like, I really just need like dead silence. I realize when I want to make something that I feel really confident about. So yeah, definitely I think as I write, I've learned to trust myself a little bit more, where I can throw out an idea and trust that it's good. But generally, I do like to sit with things for a while until it feels just, you know when something's like 100% fleshed out. And I think it's like kind of like with writing a book or like writing essays or whatever, when you don't do different drafts and revise, like you don't know if it's the best that it could be, and so yeah, it takes me the silence, and it takes me a lot of just listening to my own ideas over and over. My producers will laugh because whenever we finish a session, I'm like, okay, send me a SoundCloud link of the most recent version, and like by like the next day it's been listened to like 1,000 times or whatever, because it's just me like literally like, oh, I'm gonna go to bed, I just put it on, I'm just listening over and over and over again until it's just like ingrained. And they're like, Jason, you listened to this like 800 times. I'm like, I know. But like now I know it's good, because if I had listened to only 100 times, I would be like, is this really good, so
interesting.
Yeah,
that's kind of the opposite from how it works for me, and I know some other people, is that, well, maybe, but I'm wondering if you take space, because for me there'll be a song, and often with new ideas I'm super hyped and I'm like super excited, because it's that special moment when something's emerged out of the ether and it's brand new, and it's like, wow, where the hell did that come from? It's like emerged out of me or emerged out of the band, and there's this thing there, and listening, and it's really great. But then sometimes the best thing that I can do personally for myself is to like entirely forget it as best I can, and just not listen to it for like 2 weeks, at least a week, and then listen to it again with fresh ears, as if I'm like a brand new listener listening to this song. And then I feel it, and then I go, okay, that's good. Or I listen to it and go, that doesn't actually do anything for me. Do you have to take spaces? My only fear with like listening to stuff over and over again is that I'll completely ingrain it in my memory, and then I won't be able to properly take space from it,
I definitely do both. It's almost like I have to listen until I can't anymore. And then I
Okay.
want to take space. And then I definitely do take my space and go back. And then, like, I was just in LA, so I was doing some sessions. And so while I was there working on the song, every day I'd be listening to be like, ooh, actually that bass line could do this instead. Or like, oh, actually like this harmony needs to go here. Those kind of ideas. And then once I left LA, I haven't listened since. And now it's been like 2 weeks or so. But even now I still don't feel like that like yearning to go back and listen. But yes, I do the like over listening until I'm like sick of it, low key. And then I go back and listen with like a fresher ears and more, what's the word, I guess, with like a fine tooth comb. So yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's
And
so
sometimes to
interesting.
my detriment though, too, like Empire, by the time it came out, like Nelson and I we could not even listen to it anymore. Like when Empire was released, we were like so like underwhelmed. And to the point when Already One came out, which we had done a lot less listening to, because yeah, Already One, when we finished it, we were like, you know what, this is good. And it wasn't ever really like a fan, I hadn't ever performed it, so we didn't know if it was like a fan favorite or not. So we were like, you know what, this will just be like a fun little one. So when Already One came out, we were so pumped, to the point where we like convinced ourselves it was like light years better than Empire. We were like, this is way better. And then like after like a month or so of not listening to Empire, we like listened to the whole EP again. And we're like, actually, no, like they're both pretty much on the same level. We were just so tired of Empire that we hated it by the time it came out. Yeah, especially with the mixing and stuff, I'm also very involved. So like having to hear like all the different mix versions and all the different mix drafts. And I was performing it already from I wrote it, which I often do. Like I'll write a song and I'll just start performing it. Even if I haven't recorded yet or produced yet, I'll just start performing whatever version I have. And so I had done that for Empire for like 2 years before it came out, I think, or even more. Like I think I finished writing and performed it the first time in 2019. And so by the time it came out this year, it was like, it's dead to me.
Yeah. It's fresh for everyone else, but for you, it's been around for quite a while.
Yeah. Not even fresh to everyone else. I would meet people that would be like, oh, I love your song Empire, because they had like seen it on someone's story or come to a couple shows or whatever. So in their mind, like it was out. And so and people are like, oh, I love your song Empire. And I'm like, yeah, like this really needs to come out, because there are already people that think that it is. Yeah, I think like even when I announced Empire coming out, there were a few people that were kind of like, wait, this isn't already out. But also I was like, fake fans, because like if you had looked it up, you would know. but it definitely was the vibe.
Yeah. I mean, it presents an interesting challenge for live performance, right? Like you've got these songs that you've performed so many times and you've heard literally hundreds of times in the mixing process, and then countless times before that, and all the different iterations of the demos and everything. Do you have any processes you go through for live shows, to get back into the space where you can really feel that performance? Is there anything that you go through to get into that proper performative space and feel the music, even though you've heard it that many times and maybe you're sick of the recorded version of it?
Yeah, honestly, like oftentimes, like rarely am I performing to the exact same group of people again. And I actually do get excited though to perform a song like Empire, which I've been doing since 2019, because I'm so comfortable with the song. I'm not even thinking while I'm performing. And so performance-wise, I actually love those songs that I'm tired of, like listening-wise, because I don't even have to think and I can just be free with it, and I get more creative. Whenever I'm debuting newer songs, I've only done it a couple times, no matter how much I've practiced, there is this little feeling of like, okay, what's the best way to like do this verse, or what pose am I gonna do here, or like, am I gonna dance here? Am I gonna put the mic on the stand? Like little things like that. But with Empire, like it's to a T, to the point where like, if I don't do something, people are like, where's the split at the end? Like, we know that's supposed to happen, like it's just, there's a routine, like it's, yeah. So so performance-wise, I actually love doing the same things over and over. Yeah,
it's a new environment, and the audience gives a lot of energy, right? So that makes total sense. I'm curious what goes on in your brain, when you're writing or performing. I've been experimenting, especially with singing, with just trying some visual stuff in my brain, like as the notes move higher, there's like, it's not even anything really distinct, but there's something going on in my brain visually that moves up and down, and I find that the performance is really different and it feels different. I'm wondering if you have, I know other artists when they're composing or performing, they, you know, imagery comes to their mind, or colors when they're writing melodies or words, or when they're performing. I'm wondering if there's anything happening visually for you, either in the composition process or in the performance process.
So for both composition and performance, I have to get into this headspace where I just envision the largest audience ever, the biggest stadium, because ultimately I just want to remind myself to give my all, regardless of if it's like 50 people, you know? So I always have to kind of psych myself up into feeling those chills of like a huge stadium where I can't even see the faces. Because yeah, I think sometimes when I do like intimate events, it's natural to want to give less and, you know, be chill, because it's like, if there's like 20 people and I'm like belting down the house or whatever, it just feels kind of awkward. But I'm like, no, but that's what I need to give to show that that is where we're going, to show people what the fantasy is, you know, that's where it's going to be. So I definitely just have to envision the largest crowds when I practice. And I've gotten really good at like the delusionalness of it all, because I can definitely like be in my bedroom and have like the full body chills of like, this is crazy performance. And my parents like walk in, they're like, what is happening in here? But yeah, definitely that helps. And then another thing I thought about vocally is I always try to picture as if like, here's my highest note on some sort of hill and I'm like on this mountain. So whatever my highest note is, it's like I'm coming down to meet it rather than going up to meet it. And that helps me be way more confident in terms of hitting those. And a lot of times too, it's like when it's a more intimate audience, I don't want to get too loud, or I don't want to belt that hard or whatnot. And so I always have to picture like, no, you're already here. You're coming down to meet that. That's already underneath you. You're not going up or taking anyone anywhere. You're just coming down to it. So definitely think about that a lot. So yeah.
That's super interesting. I've tried that same exercise of a massive crowd, you know, in the production process. If you get to the point where it's mix 57 and you're getting bored of it, it's like, imagine playing this in front of the giant crowd at the festival that you want to do, you know? And yeah, it can definitely get the inspiration flowing again. And yeah, thanks for the reminder. That's something that I tried a while back and it definitely works, but it's something I've kind of forgotten about. So yeah, super useful.
Other times too, it's like, because like sometimes I'm really good at doing that in my bedroom, but not necessarily like to the crowd or whatever. So sometimes it's kind of like a mix where I'm telling myself, you're performing just like you did in your bedroom when you were imagining the huge crowd, since you can't visualize them now. You know what I mean? Or I'm like, hit that note like you did in your shower when you were picturing the big crowd that's not here. You know? Gotcha, so it's like, I have to go into places and spaces like, and visualize, and it definitely helps the performance to be what it needs to be. And even now though, I will have times where at the end of a performance I'm like, you know, you definitely went harder on that choreo on your own than you did with the crowd, because it was underwhelming to you and you have to like snap out of that, you know? So yeah, it's
interesting, the crowd, you know, I saw we played a festival a few years back, I think 2020, and Matt Corby was playing. And,
I love Matt Corby.
Matt Corby is incredible.
Love Matt Corby.
Yeah. Rainbow Valley is one of the greatest albums ever made, in my opinion. It's so beautiful, just a masterpiece. And he did the whole thing himself, the bastard.
Yeah,
the flute and everything. But no, he's awesome. And I was in like the like artist area where there's the cocktail machines and food and lounges and blah blah blah. And Matt Corby was there getting a cocktail, like a cocktail machine, and he was wearing this. He was wearing this T-shirt, and it had this really obscure, weird show called Check It Out. It was Dr. Steve Brawl. It's this like nightmare television, really weird TV show that some friends and I quite enjoy. But it's really weird. I would not have expected him to be a fan, and he was wearing a T-shirt of that in the style of Jurassic Park. So it's like this really weird T-shirt, and it's like I just didn't even think, and I went and chatted to him about that. But I commented because I saw him play, and the crowd was kind of crappy in our city. I get annoyed at my city sometimes because they sometimes are just crappy crowds. Like they show up, they buy the ticket, they show up thing, and they're in the crowd, but they're just kind of like bumming around, talking to each other, and not watching the music. I'm
I
like,
can't
what are you
with
doing?
that. Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I said that to Matt. I was like, I said, awesome show, man. But I was just like, shame about the crowd. Sorry about it. Sorry about Christchurch. We didn't really pull it together for you. And he just said to me a really interesting thing. He said, bro, I only care about the first 3 rows. That's all I pay attention to. And I was like, that's a really interesting tip. It's like, he's like, that's where the real people are. That's like where the real fans are. Okay, there'll be shows where the whole crowd's amazing, and he did some shows in Christchurch here at the Isaac Theatre Royal, which is a smaller venue, and the crowd was awesome. Like, it was very attentive and amazing. But, and he'd have those crowds all over the show. But I thought that was a great tip. Maybe he came up with that earlier in his career. It's just like, just focus on the first 3 rows. They're the ones that are there for you. They're the ones that you can see properly. You can see their faces. And just engage with them, and they're the ones, they've made it all the way at the front. They're going to love it if you engage with them too. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Even at Coachella I recently went to, you could tell like some of the, because there's so many artists playing at once, and you could tell some of the artists even on the main stage would get like affected when they'd see like large crowds like moving away in the back. And it was just interesting to hear them like, because I'm up at the front, but I hear them keep yelling like, we're just getting started, da 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 da. I'm like, why do you said we're just getting started like 7 times? Are we getting started, or like what's happening? And then I realized, I was like, oh, there's so many people in the back that are going to some other stage. But yeah, and I wish they had just focused on those of us that were, like right there in the front, because it still was like hundreds of us, But definitely something I try to remind myself as well, because I've had the experience, like my last show I did in New York, where it was a joint show with all these different artists. So you had all these different groups of fans that when their artist wasn't playing would just be talking and buying drinks and whatever. And it was kind of like a odd shaped venue. So it wasn't like there was like a bar somewhere and then the big stage and everything. It was like everything was just all together. And so it was incredibly frustrating for all of us that went up to perform when like we just had like our little group of people that came for us in the front, and everyone else was just like mingling like it's like some sort of social. And that like precedent was already set, because the first act that went up was just like instrumental. So it felt very much like background music to some sort of mixer. And then after that, each of us are like, no, we're actually singers now. So if you guys, I remember one of the acts like after me, she went up and just screamed like blood curdling at the top of her lungs. So everyone like freaked out and got really quiet. And then she started singing.
Genius.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was like, yeah. And that was definitely like, it was like kind of like, I don't want to say traumatic, but like I thought about that show for like weeks after, because it had never been that hard for me to captivate an audience. Like it was so like, like you're singing and people will like maybe turn and look at you for like a few seconds and they'll go back to just like talking, but you're still there. Like it was so weird. And my brother afterwards was like, yo, but like all of us that did come for you in the front, like we were there, we were present. Like you can't get that, let that psych you out. And I don't think most people noticed, but my brother, since he'd seen me like perform so much, like for example, he was like, you didn't drop the split at the end of Empire. So I could tell you weren't fully engaged. And so, yeah, definitely did let that get to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we both need to pick up Matt Corby's tip and just focus on the first few rows.
Yeah. Just focus on the first few.
Yeah. And as a fan, I don't know, I saw Bonobo play in 2018 at Laneway, and that kind of gave me the energy to like really go ahead with music properly with an original project. It was so incredible. And we were right at the front. And that's the place. That's the immersive spot next to the subs, and the artist is right there. And it's just like moving through. It's like, that's where it's like transcendent. If you're at the back of the crowd, you're not going to get that experience really anyway at a festival.
Yeah.
Anyway. It's going to be cool if you hear the music, but it's not going to be that like being inside the music experience.
Yeah. I mean, there are some festivals that do pretty good at like putting subs further out as well. So like, for example, at Coachella, there's this one stage where like actually like if you can't make it to the front, the best place to be is one of like the further beer gardens, because they have the speakers like in there playing the music. And so it's like the closest you can get to the music without being at the front. And so if we were too late to like rush all the way to the front, we would just go there, but you would feel like you'd have like the sub just like going through you nice. Regardless. And so it was really cool and weird, because it's like we're so far, but we feel like they're right in our ear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But definitely there were other stages that like was a mess in that regard, because if you weren't close, you did not have that at all. Like, I think, unfortunately, like, disclosures that, like, if you weren't at the front, like, so many people ended up leaving because it was, like, the way they had the speaker set up was just not working, which is something that, like, I guess, like, as an artist, like, you don't think about to, like, put, like, on your writer or whatever, like, I need my audience speaker set up this certain way. But it's something that after that experience, I was like, I would definitely be thinking about that, because it changed the perception of so many performances, like how far away you could be and still be close to a speaker. So, yeah.
Another good tip. Subs in the middle of the crowd, please.
Yeah, just put them underground if you need to. Just have them standing on subs.
Yeah. Yeah, just got a couple more questions for you, bro, but this has been super fun. Let's talk about your style, because your style's amazing, and it's super unique and distinctive, and I think it's, massive kudos for coming up with that yourself. How did you develop it?
So, not really representing that today with this hoodie, but it's been a lot of experimentation. I started thrifting once I moved to the States, just as like a hobby and a pastime. And I became very passionate about like just more sustainable options. And also what I loved about it is you could just find more unique pieces rather than like shopping at like a Zara or an H&M or like fast fashion, where like every other person you meet is gonna know where you got it or have the exact same thing. And I've always had this individuality complex since I was little that I think I got from my mom. She's like someone that always stands out, and I loved that about her and always wanted to be someone that stood out. Which also wasn't hard, because I was like, when I was little, I was going to a school where I was like one of the only Black kids like in my class. So I already was standing out. So I was like, I'm just gonna go full force with this and like grow the hair out, get the crazy fashion together. And then more recently, I've just been very inspired by things that I think fit the word regal. And so I look back at things like 14th or 17th century France, people like Louis XIV. I love things that kind of harken to like Renaissance. So I love a lot of metallics. I love a lot of white and flowy, a lot of draping and ruffles, and really things that are not so much for function, but very obviously for fashion. Like when you see someone wearing a shirt with a ton of fabric and ruffles and ribbons, you're like, that does not serve any purpose, but just to evoke that emotion, you know, that they are serving, whether that's like the freedom or the joy or just the excess. And so a lot of the things that I wear now really like are not for function. It's really just for self-expression. And I love things that are white and airy and flowy, because that represent the kind of freedom that I'm going for. And then the metallic kind of represents like the wealth. I always call like my songs like my treasures. Like if my journey is my rain, like my treasures and my gold is these creations. And so I love things that harken to that. And I love it when someone reads Regal Jason as like my username and looks at my outfit and goes, oh, makes sense. And I kind of like started paying attention to what those indicators were. And yeah, I love that kind of thing. And I'm very careful with like what kind of brands I would wear, because I definitely do want to get more into fashion and do bigger collaborations and release like my own lines of some of these designs and stuff. But I definitely do want to put some sort of focus on sustainability. And just self-expression in general. I've realized how many people are kind of caged by this weird idea of what's socially acceptable, or really it is the real idea of what is. But when you break out of that, you realize like it's not so bad. And it also kind of serves as a defense mechanism, because when you dress like everyone else who you may or may not even like, just to appease them, you end up like attracting people who you also don't even like, you know? And so as I started dressing weird and people, you know, some people would kind of stay away and other people were very attracted, I actually started attracting more like-minded people, because ultimately fashion is like, it's a language as well. And so sometimes it does serve as a purpose. Like if I know I'm going to a certain networking event, I might actually look at what type of outfits are the people wearing and put my own spin on it, because I know I have a better chance of connecting with these people if I'm speaking the same language, even the way that I present, you know? And on the other hand, I know that when people do not like my outfits or they're not interested, I'm like, well, that's my defense mechanism, because who knows, I could have dressed normal and befriended you only to realize that you're very different in your mindset anyways, which I'm not against that. Like, you definitely want to have people around you with different opinions and different mindsets and whatnot to expand your horizons. But also when you're trying to find community, which is something that's been huge for me moving from city to city, I definitely wanted to signal with my fashion the kind of person I am and the kind of person I want to attract, which are the creatives and the artists and the individuals. And I always say it's kind of like, ironic because my whole thing is to be as individual as I can be to attract other people that are equally as individual in their expression and in their artistry. So in a way, it is signaling to find this community by being as different as I can be. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's super understated, the power of what you wear, and it works as a really natural filter, as you say, for the people that you want to have around. You know, people that are offended by what you wear are probably not the people you want to have in your life anyway, right?
Exactly.
As you're saying. And you know what I've found with we throw these events here called Mary Hush here in Christchurch, and they're these like immersive art events. With our last one had 350 people in 18 zones and 2 stages, and you know went till 6 or 7 in the morning, and yeah, they're super fun and really special events, and you know all of them are themed. And so one thing we found with parties is that if people coming, you know, dressed up in some kind of a costume, they act different. They act totally different to how they would in like the normal life. And one of the easiest things that happens is like it gives people an excuse to talk to each other, even if they don't know them.
Yes.
You know, if you're wearing something really cool, they can say, "Hey, I love the crazy hat you've got on. Like, tell me about that." And then the conversation begins. Otherwise, if you're just wearing like normal clothes from H&M or whatever, it's hard. You know, where do you can start a conversation randomly, but it's just an easy way to do it. A really easy, non-threatening way to interact. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had a time where like I would wear all these crazy outfits to the club or whatever. And so like it became this thing where like every week though, the same people would comment on my outfit, but we'd never have any other conversation. And I straight up at one point had to be like, okay, we've made the introductions, like let's talk about something else. But I've also had the experience though, where I can tell someone's kind of alone or like not really having the best time or whatever. And I'm trying to find my in on like starting conversation, but like they aren't wearing anything that for me to comment on. And I'm like, what is my in? Like, it really does make it easier because then I just kind of have to be like, hey, saw you over here. You know, like, where I could be like, oh, I love this. Yeah, no. Yeah. Definitely helps and definitely is a great networking tool. And also, like, it can work a little bit as a form of social currency, which I don't know if I'm like 100% for, but I definitely have sometimes benefited from just wearing something interesting and like getting invited to an event when I didn't know anyone else there, or like getting let in at a club, or, you know, like having so-and-so notice me on Instagram or whatever, because having something unique to you can be a social currency in the world of the artists and creatives, because it's an outwards expression of like what makes you different, and also can kind of get people to be, what's the word? It can act as like bait for people to care what you have to say, because they assume based on your unique expression, you have a unique point of view as well. And that's something that I've always tried to like explain to people that have maybe told me to like switch up my branding and go more pop, where I'm like, ultimately, like I would not care about some of the opinions that I express on this project. I'm like, you wouldn't necessarily care to listen to that when the person presenting it to you looks and sounds the same as everyone around you in your regular life. You could just go talk to your friends. But when you see someone presenting completely different, it builds some interest of like, okay, this person, something about them is different, so their point of view might be different as well. So yeah, just signaling really is what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah. And in the same way, if I wanted to be more relatable, then I'd probably, you know, I'd wear something like this or so.
Yeah, tell us about that hoodie.
So this is my merch. It reads Regal with the definition. I had so many people when I first launched Regal Jason, and even now that like don't know what the definition of Regal is. In the States, there's this big like movie theater chain called Regal Cinemas. So to have people be like, "Oh, is it like the cinema?" And I'm like, "Well, it's the word. So it is the same word, but it's the definition." And they're like, "Oh, what does that mean?" Or when I was in Panama, because like Spanish is a language here, people would think it's Regal Jason and like not know what the word was. So for my first drop, I was like, we're just gonna put the definition on here. And then a lot of people realized they actually resonate very hard with the word Regal and the definition behind it. So now we've kind of just ran with it. So
yeah, it's dope. It's dope.
Hopefully there'll be like, we're doing a few new colorways. We're doing like tote bags and stuff. And we might start also just picking different words from different songs that I think are cool and just putting the definitions, because I started to realize there was a lot of like words and verbiage and whatnot I was using that was kind of a little bit going over people's heads. So it's just like a fun way to just like kind of educate and just make things a little bit more relatable when you like understand what is being discussed. So
that's a great idea. A merch line that uses some of the more evocative lyrics from your catalog and explains what they mean. I like that. I love that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. Like my second single, in the chorus, Fences, it says we're too tumultuous, and I had so many people just being like, "What does that even mean?" And I was like, "Okay, like, definitely." I kind of was like, "Okay, I definitely have to do something with the marketing to like reach people that maybe read more than my immediate circle." But also, like, I was like, "We're gonna do something with the merch to like catch you up to speed." So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I've got. Is there anywhere to buy the merch? Is it out now for sale?
Oh yeah, so you can purchase the merch. So far, just the hoodies on regaljason.com. It is available there. So yeah, we're currently like trying out a different like hoodie provider than what I was previously using. So I haven't done like the official launch on all platforms yet, where I'm gonna like really push the merch. But yes, it is available for purchase, and if anything changes like in the next few months of like who we're using and stuff, then you'll have a completely exclusive drop if you go and purchase it now, because we're still kind of trying out different providers before we fully announce it. But it is on regaljason.com, as well as all the links to the music and a few press articles that I liked and more info and NFTs and everything is there on the website right now. So yeah.
Awesome. Now I've got one last question for you, and then we'll leave it there. And that question is, let's say you're having an off day for inspiration and there's nothing coming around. It doesn't sound like you have too many of those. Sounds like there's always something going on in the brain radio. But let's say you're having an off day but you want to be inspired. What do you do?
Definitely, I like looking for interesting films. Film is something that can definitely inspire. The same with literature. So reading or watching interesting films. There's this site called Mubi, which has a lot of these like art house films on it, MUBI, and you can just find really interesting films with really interesting soundtracks and just really cool visuals. A lot of my stuff, when I'm writing, I see the visuals around it. It's like I'm writing a score for something, whether or not I actually turn it into a music video or not. So yeah, I would say watching really cool shows or watching cool movies will definitely help for inspiration. Yeah.
And what's next for Regal Jason?
So for now, we're just going to keep promoting this current EP. I have another video that we're working on. I'm hoping to give videos to all of the songs eventually. So we're going to be rolling out some videos throughout the summer. And there might be a collab between me and Nelson coming out as well as kind of our summer release. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. Nelson and I do so much that hasn't seen the light of day. We're so happy to finally have this project out because it's been in the works since like 2019. But in that time, we've also written so much other music that we've just kind of like, okay, we're just going to wait, put out a little bit at a time and see how it goes. But yeah, more releases and more visuals coming very soon.
Epic. And is there anything else you'd like to express or share before we finish it off?
I always like to kind of open up the discussion on what you feel the genre of the music is, because it's been kind of up for debate and all over. So if you do go ahead and listen to the Project Megafauna, you can shoot a little comment or a DM on Instagram. I would love to hear your thoughts on what genre or what space you think this belongs in, what artists you find are similar. Because yeah, I've heard things from all over the place that I'm still kind of defining. And the term regal pop has come up quite a bit now because it's been kind of all over the place with like alt pop or avant-garde pop or experimental or indie and all sorts of things. So yeah, if you go ahead and listen to the project, I would love to have a chat with you on Instagram or whatever platform you feel comfortable on to hear what you think it sounds like.
Regal pop. Such a great genre, man. Jason, thanks so much for coming on to Studio 721. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure for me. Thank you for inviting me, honestly. And I love what you do as well. I love your projects. It's great.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Appreciate that. Maybe we'll get you on, in a 6 months time or something when there's some more music out and maybe we could get Nelson Brightmore on as well and discuss.
Yeah.
Get into some of the stems of the tracks and just get a bit more into the actual, production and how the vocals are produced and all that sort of stuff would be quite fun to do.
Yeah.
If you can.
Would love to for sure.
Awesome, bro. All right, well, until then, all the best. And look forward to the new releases. And everyone, you can find Regal Jason at regaljason.com. And definitely check out Megafauna. Check out the whole EP. It's amazing. And thanks once again, bro.
Thank you.